Hello everybody. My office space, you may have noticed that it's changed slightly. This is actually the cottage that my partner and I have been working on for the past year or two now. We call it a cottage, but it's actually a little house. It's 900 square feet and we're slowly getting there. We have hot water now, which is really great. We still don't have a shower or a bath. They're in, but they're not hooked up yet. Now, because I seem to be spending more time on Vancouver Island these days, I decided to set up a little workstation here in one of the bedrooms. And so I've taken this old monitor from the house and I'm using my laptop that I take on my trips with me. For me to set up this little workstation, I've decided to copy all of my photographs from home onto another set of hard drives. I think I have 60 or 70,000 images, which is a heck of a lot of images. Now, unfortunately, it's also really depressing because I'm looking through all of these files, and it's amazing how many of them are actually pretty crap. I should really go through them and delete a lot of them. I hate to admit it. Now, even though I'm a professional and been a photographer now for almost 25 years, I make a lot of mistakes. Most of it is because of my character. My partner Karen will be the first to tell you that I'm a bit of a scatterbrain. I'm always forgetting stuff. And when it comes to photography, I screw up a lot. Usually it's because I'm so focused on one aspect of photography that I might forget to do something with my camera or whatever. What does that have to do with this video? Well, I wanted to kind of go over some of those screw ups with you, and hopefully you will learn something from my screw ups. I'm sure a lot of you out there have your own stories to tell, and if you do, please leave them in the comments below. Perhaps all of us can learn something from your mistakes as well. So what I'd like to do is show you some of the photographs that I took recently that aren't so good and didn't quite work, and kind of go over with you why they didn't work. So without further delay, why don't I show you some examples of why I screwed up. Okay. Okay, you may have noticed right off the bat I put a bunch of my successful images in just to make up for the unsuccessful ones that I'm just about to show you, try and redeem myself. Okay, a number of weeks ago I had a workshop on the west coast of Vancouver Island in the Port Renfrew area, and one of the locations that I like to take my participants is Fairy Lake. Now Fairy Lake is quite cool because kind of to one side of the middle of the lake there's this old growth stump sticking out of the lake, and at the very end of it there's this lonely conifer just kind of sitting on top. Now I've been told that this little tree is actually 30 years old. I guess in some ways it's quite symbolic because we have this lonely tree surrounded by water sitting in the middle of a lake. And that's one of the reasons why I keep going back and photographing it over and over. Every time I've gone to photograph the tree, the conditions have always been quite different. The one thing that doesn't change that much though is the composition. It's hard to get a different angle on this tree. Now in the past it had been too hard to get down to the lakefront because usually the water level is too high, but on this occasion the water level was quite low, and a number of the participants in the workshop decided to kind of scramble down to the lakefront there. So I followed suit, and the conditions were just fantastic. We had this fog rolling in and the sun was just starting to skim the back of the tree and the side of the log that it's growing out of. Something else that was quite exciting was from this lower angle, I was able to finally find a composition that was a little bit different than everything else that I'd taken in the past. So the composition involves having the lonely tree in the middle of the frame, and then it was framed quite nicely by these two dead snags, one on each side. And then at the bottom of the frame, I had these really great grasses. Now, the only problem with this composition was that I was using a 70mm lens. And because of the angle of view of a 70mm, it's impossible to get everything in sharp focus from foreground to background when I'm that close to the foreground. Even stop down to f16 or f22, it wouldn't be all in focus. So I decided to do a bit of focus stacking. Now, I have done a couple of videos in the past about focus stacking, and in this case it was kind of the same thing. I have my Nikon D850, which is great for focus stacking because you just go into the menu and it does everything automatically for you. All you have to do is put the images together when you get back home. Now, in this case, I'd set up the focus stacking, but I didn't bother to look at how it was set up. And I just pushed the OK button and it took a whole bunch of images. And I did this several times just to make sure I got the shot. Now, unfortunately, when I got home, I realized that what I hadn't done was I hadn't set up the focus step width, which is the distance between each image taken. And everything in the foreground was in sharp focus, but everything in the background was out of focus. So I'd pretty much screwed up the whole image. And really, it was just laziness on my part. What I would usually do is take a couple of images and make sure that everything is sharp on the back of the camera. But in this case, I neglected to do that. I just relied on the camera technology to do everything for me. So lesson learned there. Doing a focus stack manually would have been very easy in this case. It would have been just a matter of taking one image of the grasses in the foreground, one of the dead snags, perhaps one of the lonely conifer, and then another one of the background, and then stack those four images. But in this case, I relied on my camera and, well, I screwed up. So lesson learned there. Okay, since I'm talking about screwing up focusing, I might as well talk about an embarrassing thing that happened to me several years ago on a trip to Iceland. Okay, now I'd never been to Iceland, but I decided to go in March because I thought it'd be a good time of year to photograph the Northern Lights. And to be honest with you, I haven't done an awful lot of night photography, especially the aurora. I hadn't had much opportunity to photograph the aurora. So I traveled around the island and I saw the Northern Lights a few times, but not really good enough to photograph. Not until I got down to, okay, I know I'm going to screw up the pronunciation, but I think it's called Hitzkivir. Now, Hitzkivir in itself is a pretty impressive rock formation, but to have the aurora behind it, I thought would be a really great photograph to have. And luck was in my favor. The aurora that evening was just spectacular. It would come in waves, and what I saw on the back of my camera, I was capturing something quite special that night. However, there was a couple of huge mistakes that I made that I regret to this day. First off, I was checking the images on the back of my camera, but I wasn't zooming in and looking at the focus. And the second problem was that I'd put my lens on the infinity mark. And most of you will know, and if you don't know, then you know now, you should never use the infinity mark on your lens to focus to infinity. And the reason why you don't want to do that is because lenses expand and contract with different temperatures. So what might be infinity one day, if the temperature changes, then the infinity won't be the same on that same lens. So be really careful about that. I learned the hard way. So ideally, if you are going to do some night photography, your best bet towards success is to work out what your infinity is before you start your photography at night. It's much easier to do it in the day. Now, if you are trying to focus at night, then a flashlight comes in really handy, and if you can shine your light on something that's quite far away and focus on that. Or I know some people can actually focus on individual stars with their screen on the back of the camera. But yeah, check your focus regularly when you're doing night photography. Okay, this third mistake is a doozy, and it's one that I continually make. And I know better, but for whatever reason, I'm always forgetting to turn off the vibration reduction button on my lens, or IS on Canon lenses. I use it very rarely, but occasionally I'll use it, or I might nudge it by accident. And of course, as soon as you put your camera on a tripod and you leave the vibration reduction button on, then you get what's called a feedback loop. And so what's happening is that the camera with the IS system is essentially trying to detect its own vibrations, and then it starts moving around even when the rest of the camera is quite still. And of course, this movement introduces motion and blurriness in your image, so that's not a good thing. I'm almost considering getting the super glue out and super gluing that blasted button, or getting some duct tape and just duct taping it, because I don't know, I'm always making the same mistake. So my advice, even though I don't seem to be taking my own advice, is to check your lens continually to make sure that the IS or VR is off when you're using your camera on a tripod. Okay, now these last two images aren't really fails, and there's nothing in them that I've really done wrong, but they are interesting in that they represent probably about 70 to 80% of the images that I have in my library. The compositions are quite good, but they're only almosts, and what I mean by that is they don't quite work because the light just wasn't in my favor. And I have a lot of images like this where I've been waiting for the light, and you just keep waiting and waiting, and every now and then you'll take an image just to kind of satisfy yourself, but you know in the back of your mind that they're really not working because of one thing or another. The snowy image, I really like the composition. I love the lines in the foreground and the swirling clouds, but what it's missing is a little bit of directional light on any part of the scene, and also the fact that you can't really see the peak doesn't help it at all. And the second image, I set up this composition. I really liked the composition. I got quite excited about it, but the light just wasn't working for me. And actually the group that I was with, we started heading back to the lodge, and then all of a sudden the clouds broke. So I ran back thinking that perhaps I might get some backlighting on the full arch, but it just doesn't work. You really need some kind of, I don't know, dramatic or exciting light just to kind of give it a bit of oomph. It doesn't necessarily have to be dramatic evening light or morning light. It's just trying to match the light that you have with the scene that you have, and make it work. And in these two cases, it doesn't really work for me. Right. I hope you got something out of this video. You know, as a professional, and I've been doing this for quite a long time now, obviously I want to put my best foot forward, and I'm only going to show my best work, as most photographers are. And of course, over a 20-year period, I'm going to have a pretty half-decent body of work, and that's what you guys get to see. Now, even though I'm out a lot and I do come away with great images now and then, you have to remember I'm out an awful lot, and because I'm out an awful lot, I also screw up an awful lot. And even though I might get 1 or 2 images that are really, or that I really like, there's many, many more that just don't work out. So when you do make a mistake, or you take images that you're thinking are going to be really good and they turn out not so great, don't despair, don't beat yourself up. Just try to learn from your mistakes. 99% of the time it's either light or composition. So if there's something that you don't like in your photograph, say to do with composition, then try and correct it the next time you come across a similar situation. Or if it's the light and, you know, for whatever reason it just didn't work, then you'll know that for next time. And it all comes down to experience. The more you're out there, the more you're shooting, the more experienced you become, the more proficient, and eventually you'll start to get images that you really want or that you really like. You will still keep making mistakes, but you'll learn to live with them. All right, thank you ever so much, everybody. Please be sure to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoy the content of all my other videos, don't forget to subscribe. All right, until next time, thanks ever so much. Bye for now. If you enjoyed this video, pause.